8th. The poet was hoeing in his vegetable garden. His attire was theatrical, his red crape sash, laxly surrounding his trousers, lacked, I'm sorry to say, a large Japanese tobacco bag. The cap with gay ribbons was like one of Li Hung Chang's. His back carried a bearskin, inside of which some slovenly yellow silk flapped down. How tall he was! "Please don't dig over there, Mr. Heine, because I buried my poem there," I said. "What poem, my lady?" he asked. "The poem to be read at the unveiling of my statue of the Muse on your mountain top, which may occur, possibly, within 5 years. The opening lines sound thus: 'Victor of life and song, O Muse of golden grace.'" "That's great. Why did you bury it? Don't you bury your poems? The best poems are those not published. The very best are those not written. Dante Gabriel Rossetti buried his House of Life because they were not for a gaping millionaire's wife, but only for his own little wife. But his greatness was ruined when he dug them up and sold them. Poor poet! What all the poets ought to do, I think, is to bury their poems in a potato garden. What a shame even the poets have to eat once in a while. They should wait till the potatoes grow, and then sell them in a vegetable stand, calling poetical potatoes. Do you sell your poems, Mr. Heine?" "Yes. Aren't you making your living with your fruits?" "I never sell them, my dear." "What do you do?" "I give them to needy persons, but I was obliged last year to hang up a sign, 'No fruit lover is wanted.' I told an Oakland minister to come up and eat some plums. He brought his wife and children, even his grandmother. They shouldered away every bit of fruit from half a dozen trees. Next day so many people trampled in with an introduction from the minister. Such a minister! I see no use to have the sign, 'Fruit grower,' if you don't sell. Well, my dear lady, God will be merciful to let me use it in place of 'poem manufacturer.'" My uncle announced that tea was boiled. We left the garden. 9th. The fogs held possession of our world, like the darkness of night. Where did they invade from? Pacific Ocean? Our hillside cottages looked like a tottering ship, having no hope for any haven. Tremendous sight. I planted me on the hilltop, my mind merged in Japanese mythology. I felt as if I were the first goddess, Izanagi, standing on the floating bridge of heaven before the creation. The divine ghastliness bit my little soul. I couldn't stand against it. I crept down like a mouse. The poet said he was preparing a lecture. Its title was "Not in Books." He, in his bed, there he passes every forenoon, was reciting his song. The words leaped like a leaping sword. "Sail on, sail, sail on and on." I threw a bunch of roses over to his bed, as an admirer does to a star. Then I clapped my hands. Pan, 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 pan. 10th. I went up the hill to gather mushrooms and watercresses. I filled a huge basket with them. I carried it down on my shoulder in Chinese laundry style. I paused every 20 steps. I slipped within the gate of Mrs. Heine's back garden. "Mushrooms, watercresses," I called boisterously. "My dear girl," Grandma smiled out from her door, "keep your hands off, please. They are things for sale. To-day they are uncommonly cheap. Will you buy them?" "How much do you charge?" 2,000 words of the story about your illustrious son's life." "What a funny vendor! Tell me something about him. I'm ready to leave you the whole business." "Shall I narrate to you how he started to write?" "How interesting!" I ejaculated. "Let me see your things first," she said, tugging the basket nearer. "My dear child, they aren't watercresses, but baby weeds. I don't consider they are legitimate mushrooms either." She turned upon me with compassionate objection. Oya, Oya, you don't say so, I exclaimed. Then, no story, Grandma? I looked up meekly. 11th. We had sipped our supper tea some time ago. A band from the bay sent up irregularly the melody of the love and prowess of dear mariners. The white moon rose. I sat alone on my front step and watched tenderly by the poppy. My darling Miss Poppy shook herself prettily, as if she uttered a sweet word out of her heart. I imagined every sort of speech that may come from such a tiny bit of flower. Soda, she said that she loved me. I murmured. I made a little letter. Miss Poppy, I love you too. Yours, Morning Glory. I rolled it to a ball. I dropped it in her cup. The moon turned gold. The evening odor filled the air. Look! She was folding her cup, pressing my missive to her breast. There was no question that she understood. Dearest friend, was it silly that I cried? 12th. The poet left the heights to exchange his manuscript for a gallon of whiskey. He carried a demijohn, which was as apt to him as a baby to a woman. I volunteered to clean his holy grotto. The little cottage brought me a thought of one Jap sage who lived by choice in a 10-foot square mountain hut. The venerable Mr. Chomai Kamo wrote his immortal 10-foot square record, a bureau, a bed, and one easy chair. Everything in the poet's abode inspires repose. Occupy every bit of space in Mr. Heine's cottage. The wooden roof is sound enough against a storm. A fountain is close by his door. Whenever you desire, you may turn its screw and hear the soft melody of rain. That's plenty. What else do you covet? The closetlessness of his cottage is a symbol of his secretlessness. How enviable is an open-hearted gentleman! Woman can never tarry a day in a house without a closet. He never closes his door through the year. A piece of wire is added to his entrance at night. He would say that will keep out the tread of a dog and a newspaper reporter. Not even one book. He would read the history written on the brow of a star. He will say, if I ask him why. Every side was patched by pictures and a medley of paper clippings. Is there anything sweeter to muse upon than personal knickknacks? Oh, such a dust! I swept it. But I thought philosophically afterward, why should people be so fussy with the dust when things are but another form of dust? What a far-away smell the dust had! What an ancient color! I observed on the wall an odd coat and boots that dear old Santa Claus might have lost. Klondike costume, I exclaimed. I undressed myself and tried them on. When I was ready to put on a fur cap, Mrs. Heine wandered down, calling me. Morning Glory, Morning Glory. I trembled in deadly fear. I hid me promptly by the bureau under the bed. I shut my eyes, praying, Namu Dai Jingu, don't let her find me. 13th. Last midnight. O voicelessness of the hillside Yanaka. I woke up. The moon peeped into my sitting room. She laid a square-looking glass on the floor. I abandoned my bed and sat by the glass. I spread on it the letter from my sweetheart. I read it over and over till I couldn't read any more, the moon being kidnapped by the cloud highwayman. Oh, Oscar, I cried in the darkness. I could not slumber all the night on account of my thought of him. A letter was written to him today. Nature and love, I'm now living with them. 14th. I elaborated a nosegay. The poet and uncle dignified themselves in frock coats. The coming of the coffin was slow. Mr. Poet had proffered his own graveyard to let an unknown poet lodge there. Is it because you want some one to greet you when you die? I said in laughter. I seated myself by a creek. I entered involuntarily into the riddle of life and death. The water under my feet rolled down, positively not knowing why nor whence. The wind passed willy-nilly blowing. I wondered whither it went. Mr. Omar is unquestionably a true poet. The petals of a rose before me fell. I murmured, each morn 1,000 roses brings, you say. Yes, but where leaves the rose of yesterday? I was crying in sadness when the coffin arrived. Mr. Heine and my uncle lifted it by either edge. The neighboring farmers and two sardonically cool gentlemen from the undertakers aided them. The jaw-fallen papa of the dead carried all the posies. And Miss Morning Glory, who is the belle of Tokyo, shouldered a bench for the purpose of sustaining the coffin when they were tired. The hill is precipitous. The gentlemen stopped numberless times before they stationed themselves on the top. The grave was hollowed behind Mr. Poet's monument. They sank the coffin. What a tremor of silence sharpened the air. I was shaking. The poor papa read a chapter from the Bible. He described his loving son's life in doleful honorableness. There are 1,000 flowers in spring, the poet spoke, whose repute is not extensively spoken, like that of the rose or violet. Some of them are not given even a name. They spend their smile and odor into the breeze and die without any repining. They are content because they are true to God. So a poet's life should be. What is celebrity? Keats was told of his beautiful graveyard, and he said, I've already seemed to feel the flowers growing over me. If this poet, whom we now bury, had been told of this hill, he might have said, I see already the butterflies beaming over my head. Spring is coming. The poppies and buttercups shall dress the hill. A church bell chimed from the valley. We left the buried to his solitude. My uncle and I sat under an acacia tree, silent for some time. Look, Morning Glory, he said, exhibiting a silver piece. Is there any story about that dollar? The father of the dead paid me for carrying the coffin. Uncle, did you accept it? Yes. Such a funny uncle. Why not? You have spoiled all your nobility for only $1. I upturned my face afterward, appealing, in gleeful tone. Oh, uncle, you ought to give me half of it. 50 cents. I carried the bench, you know. 15th. I rose at the first whistling of a meadowlark, hearkened to its hailing morning voice. O simple bird! Its so various moods are expressed only in its eternally changeless syllables. What a magical song! How bungling seemed our human vocabularies! I trod the garden in bare feet, naked feet, sir. The delicious chilliness of the ground animated me rapturously. Do you believe me if I confess that I knelt and kissed it? I said that I would not mind burying my nude body for a few hours. Mother Earth is so sweet. I ran up the hill, humming an oriental ditty. The air was relishable like an ice cream on a summer midnight. The beautiful sun was rising. I clapped my palms thrice, reverently bowing. Am I a sun worshipper? Yes. I cleansed my feet in the water of the creek. When I returned from the hill, I sat me on a rock, extending my bare feet in the sunlight. I thought that towel wiping was too much of a modernism. Uncle, oh, uncle, I called. What is it, Miss Morning Glory? The poet jutted out from a bamboo bush by the wooden bridge over the creek. Such charming feet, he said. I instantly lowered my skirt, blushing. He was carrying a spade and hoe. He said that he had been planting flowers about the grave of our friend ever since 4 o'clock. To make it beautiful is high poetry, he philosophized. What do you wish with uncle, my child? He continued. I want my shoes. Let me have the honor of fetching them for you, he said in amiable, dignified docility. 16th. The poet gave me 5 feet square behind the willow cottage for my potato garden. I sticked a stick at each corner. I encircled it with my crape sash. The note hanging on it read, Graveyard of Morning Glory's poem. I hired uncle for 10 cents to clear off every weed. I raked. I set the seeds. I got a suspicious coat and pants from a nook in the unrespectable barn. It was fortunate that the horse, who may also be a poet, he is so philosophically thin, didn't shout, Ho, clothes thief. I put them on the limbs of an acacia tree. I planted it on my graveyard to scare away wild intruders. It is holy ground. I wondered when the potatoes would grow. What admirable eyes! He projected his head from a hole by my window. He withdrew it a bit and bent it to one side as if he were solving a question or two. Then his eyes stabbed my face. I'm no questionable character, Mr. Squirrel, I said. He hid himself altogether. I amassed some crusts of bread by his hole and watched humbly for his honourable presence. He did not peep out at all. The bread was not a worthy invitation. I varied it with a fragment of ham. Mr. Squirrel wasn't void-stomached. I thought he needed something to read. I tore a poem from the wall. I left it by his respectable cavern. Lo, his head sprouted out to pull it in. Aha, even the squirrel is a poetry devotee in this hill, I said in humorous mood. 18th, most beloved, Mamma was flogged with a bamboo rod some 100 times when she was a girl, her exchanging of a word with a boy over the fence being deemed an obscenity. My papa spent his lonely days in a room with Confucius till one night a middleman left him with my mamma as with a dolly. I do believe they never wrote any love letter. What would they say, I wonder, if they knew that their daughter had taken to love letter writing as a profession in America? You shouldn't censure my penury in writing, knowing that I am a Musumi from such a source. Oscar, are your windows clean? Every window of my willow cottage was washed yesterday. Is there anything more happy to see, your beautiful eyes excepted, than a shiny window? I pressed my cheek to the window mirthfully when Mr. Poet tried to pinch it from the outside. My dearest, if he had been my very Mr. Ellis. I made a discovery while I was tripping about the kitchen. Can you guess what it was? Love letter writer. Gift from heaven, I said, trusting it would help me in my composition. I lit a candle last night. I hid it behind the cover of such a huge Bible, which I had borrowed for the purpose. I was heedful of 2 old men who might disturb me, mistaking the light for a sign that something had happened. Poor Mrs. Heine almost cried, she was so pleased to think that I loved the Bible. Do I love it? Oh, ho, ho, ho. Baka, Bakashi, how sad. The whole bunch of letters wasn't fit for my taste at all, at all. I'm sorry that I used up 2 candles that were all we had in this hill. So, my darling, my letter has to be woven from my truest heart. Good morning, my sweet lord. How are you? Have you breakfasted? Did you eat a beefsteak? I dislike a hearty morning eater. My ideal man shouldn't be given more than a cup of coffee and 1 trembling leaf of bacon. Mr. Poet kills a frog every morning. He says that his fancy springs like a pond singer when he tastes it. I should say that his idea bounds too far in his case. Do you eat frog? I beseech you not to incline toward it. What should I do if your thought ran off from me? Failure of my life. Love is the whole business of woman, you know. Have you any shirt to mend? I have been fixing the poets. Pray express it to me. Should you ask such a pleasure of any other girl, it would be a fatal mistake for you. Remember, Oscar, that the Japanese girl is a mightily jealous thing. My sweetheart, I dreamed a dream. You were a dragonfly, while I was a butterfly. It is needless to say that we loved. One spring day we floated down along the canyon from a mountain 1,000 miles afar. Our path was suddenly barred by a dense bush. We couldn't attain to the garden of life without adventuring in it. So then you stole in from one place, I from another. Alas, we got parted forever. Isn't that a terrible indication? Do you know any spell to turn it good? I'm awfully agitated by it. Oh, kiss me, my dear. I have to ascertain your love in it, your morning glory. 19th. A little chewy was building a nest under the roof by my door. Dear jovial toiler. I must help him in some way. I unravelled one of my stockings, hoping it might be serviceable in bettering his home. I stood me on a chair, raising up my arms with my gift. The poor sparrow was scared. He cast a grey honourableness on my hand. Oh, naughty Chewy. He winged away, twittering, Chewy. 20th, the squirrel by my window shows a great fancy for me. He honored me 3 times already this morning. He bore a somewhat scholarly air, a retired professor, I reckon. Is he regular with his diary? Possibly he is idle with a pen, like any other professor. Let me scribble for him today. My one bottle of ink has some time to dry up yet. I will name it the Cave Journal. I will leave it to the professor for a souvenir upon my sayonara to this hill. A. Where are my spectacles? B. Upon my soul, I believe that some mischief is raging. I could never trust even the poet abode. Who stole my 2-cent stamp? God bless you, my precious daughter at Sierra Nevada. By and by, I will erect my private telegraph between us. See, the idea of an idiotic spider tying his net across my front gate. However could he be so ambitious as even to incline to arrest me? He may very likely be a detective, a railroad brigand, is hiding in these heights, I suppose. The world is running worse every day. How shocking. It was a fundamental error of God to create that adventurous Eve. The offspring of a crow can't be other than a crow. Our squirrel history is not blotted by any criminal. I feel a bit conceited in speaking about it. How can I help it? The trouble with God is that he was awfully vain to express his own ability by so many useless things. Rifle, for instance. My poor wife. D. Today is the anniversary of my beloved. She was shot by one 2-legged barbarian. I appealed to the police. American police are rotten through and through. The murderer bribed them, I fancy. I found my wife, but she was only a skin. How often did I tell her that she was risking too much in sporting around? But she didn't mind me, insisting that sightseeing was a better education. I carried her skin into my home. I cleansed it and altered its form a trifle because it was a lady's. I'm still keeping it for church wear. I feel dreadful thinking of her. E. A butterfly passed by my cavern 100 times. Each time she threw me a vulgar laugh. Her face was thickly powdered in yellow. Does she think herself charming? I should say that I would prefer a girl in tights from a saloon stage to her indecency. Such a flirt. I suppose that she wanted me to marry her. No, am I not old enough to avoid running into such foolishness? F. Rainy day. I sat in a memorial corner of my cave with an unfinished novel of my wife's. I do judge she had flashes of genius. She was so deep like the sky. I never suspected that she could gracefully have beaten George Eliot if she had only survived. Poor girl. One tenderly loved by God passes away young. I've fallen into the habit of crying unmanfully nowadays. I cannot help it, can I? G. One thing I must furnish is a bathroom. Cleanliness is the first rule of heaven, I'm told. I went to the lily pond to take a gracious bath. Oh, such water gammons! Dirty-handed frogs! How could I dip me in that turbid water? The frogs ought to go to a reformatory school. They have no culture whatsoever. H. Camera hunters are thick as fogs. Today I came near being a victim. No, sir. I can't permit my picture to be seen with those of cheap matinee idols. I must keep some dignity. Americans are too commercial altogether. The pictures of our race are in demand, I imagine. I. Beautiful moon. Last night I filled my stomach with the divine water from a creek. My face waved in the water. I flattered myself that I was a pretty, handsome gentleman. I sang an ancient Chinese song. Come long tomorrow moon, carrying a harp. J. Stop your empty noise, meadowlarks. Silence is the first study of this hill, and the last, don't you know? I'm absorbed in my grave work, the secret of the world. K. My neighboring Jap girl is rather attractive, isn't she? I heard a few scratches of her native bubbling. The pagan speech is not so bad as I thought. L. If there is one thing I cannot endure, it is ignorance. What is the state of your roses, old boy? The poet Heine is utterly alien to rose culture. Shall I order How to Raise Roses from a London publisher? M. I went up the hill to pray to God. The higher, the nearer. When I came back, my honourable vestibule was blocked, I found, by the dirt. The poet was ditching close by my residence. I couldn't blame his conduct, however, because no one could see my home. I don't hang out a sign like a quack doctor. It occurred to me that I would strike into his cottage and snatch the best poems from his drawer and sell them with my name. I must secure the international copyright, I said, but I couldn't dare it, my impulse being thwarted. I am no wicked reporter, don't you see? I hid me in his historical iron pot all day. Heine was posting around the following card: no shooting. I venture to say that he is the only one civilized two-legged in the whole world. Oh, where's my napkin? Chinese laundry isn't punctual in delivery. P. I think I must learn how to swear for a pastime. Q. My fellow brother, Mr. Blank, was shot this morning. The paper says there is a possibility of war between Russia and Japan. A preacher prophesies the disappearance of the universe. Everything is precarious in the extreme. I will not poke around outside during the day. I will loaf in the poet's orchard under the breezy moonlight. Poetical existence is just enough. I will withdraw me to the sanctuary of the muses. R. Heaven be with my soul. Amen. S. Goodbye, my dear old world. 21st. A Chinaman passed with a weighty load of washing on his shoulder. Friend, stop a minute. Take a glass with me before you go. The poet rolled out with a claret bottle. Did you ever see a Chinese in love? Did you ever see one smile? Mr. Charlie smiled a serene smile of the flower kingdom pattern. God bless the Empress Dowager, Mr. Poet said. Both raised their wine. The load is too heavy for you. You are killing yourself. I can't bear to see it. My friend, obey me. Let me help you. Don't leave till I come back. The poet hurried for his questionable buggy and horse. He cracked his whip. He never whips the horse, but he carries it for fashion's sake, as he remarks. When Mr. Charlie protested, me, oh, rye, you savvy? The Chinaman was dumbfounded, for the poet was unknown to him. Mr. Heine pushed him in. When he leaped up, he noticed his horse in tender tone. Go on, baby. What a goody-goody. His act never parts from poetry, however, I said. I was simply dying for an opportunity to explode my good heart when I invited one tramp to my willow cottage. I fed him with 12 eggs. I emptied out all my change for him. Don't you feel cold lying outdoors? I said. Yes, miss. Don't you need an overcoat? Yes, miss. When Mr. Tramp left me with an overcoat in his hand, looking like a proud mayor of Tokyo, my uncle was coming from Mrs. Heine's. Uncle, you do want to be good to a poor man, don't you? You have made yourself a great philanthropist with your overcoat. What have you done? I presented it to a tramp. Morning glory. Never mind, uncle. I will buy a swell coat in New York. You have some more, haven't you? It cost me 40 yens at Hama. You really are a foolish girl, Asago. Asago is my humble name in Japanese. Then I kissed his hand most pathetically. In fun, for my part, of course. 22nd. My superstitious mamma. She mailed me an omikuji from the holy box of the Akiwa god. The number written on the slip was 51. The divine will read as follows: faith in the well God will result fortunately. Mamma bade me make my prayer long, not mixing it with any laughter whatever. I wondered whether there was any well around here. I explored. I came across one, such a doubtful well, by an apple tree. I hastened to my cottage to cut a paper flag. The poet gave me 1 cup of claret for the well god. I sat by the well. What did I pray? I pried into the well for the fin of a fish. Well, without a funa fish isn't holy to a Jap mind. 23rd. Uncle left the Heights for Frisco. I've encountered somewhere one picture, stolen kiss, symbolizing sweetness. I dare say the sweetest thing in the world is to steal into a gentleman's room and overturn his things. The gentleman's smell is provocative. My uncle, I can only say that he is more desirable than an old woman. Old woman is sad as a dry persimmon. I stole into his room. God will overlook my petty crime. How lovely to be scratched by guilt. in consideration of the fact that a Jap girl never profanes. I turned his pillow. Pillow is a fascination for me ever since I've read of a poet who hid his diary under it. Look at the book, a random note. He was working to beat me with his journal, I derided. I sat on his bed, opening it. How original, I exclaimed. Uncle, you are a cynic, aren't you? Let me pick a few pieces from his pen. Unfortunately, Japanese are accustomed from babyhood to depend on another's back. The hereditary fashion of nursing the baby on the back has thoroughly taught them dependence. Independence is only a coat of arms to distinguish man from the beasts, that is all. I urge that Emerson's essays be adopted in the Nippon schools. His self-reliance should be the first of all. Most unhappily, I've observed the Japanese fad in America for years, and it has not yet reached its culmination. Each month the books on Japan are placed before the public. It is verily sad even to cut their edges. The practical Americans prove themselves unpractical in leaving the leaves of books uncut. I say that our Japan is entitled to regard for worthier things than geisha girls or a fashion in bowing. We should decline your love, Americans, if it is rooted merely in your fancy for our paper lanterns. I frequently come to conclude that Americans are eminently the freakish nation. I feel not only occasionally that they lack the reasoning power. I do not assume the phenomena of the yellow journals as my proof. A year or two ago, one Japanese theatrical troupe roamed. They are not catalogued at home as actors. They chose to skip on the stage simply because a bit more money is in it than in the culling of lantern-carrying for politicians. Any wild animal can skip. I'm now confronted with the question whether American generosity is not without sense. They piled up their money for them. Even the first-class critics struggled to find out something from such poor art. I'm bound to be thankful, however, for the Americans saved these poor players from bankruptcy in Japan. It reminds me of a story. Our Nippon government many years ago appointed a certain loafing sailor as an English instructor, giving him a monthly pay of $300. Sailor with an anchor tattoo on his hand. $300 are no small coin in Japan. Our sailor professor said, I'm told that he had not heard of any Milton. Ignorance can easily be a philanthropist if it can be anything. Japanese love nature. They do. But how sad to glance at Japanese garden. It is painful to notice the dwarf trees. Japs never permit one thing to grow naturally. Country of deformity. America, most natural, most manly nation. 24th, my uncle didn't come back yesterday. Mr. Poet condescended to the town. I'm alone. I spent the entire forenoon with Grandma, peeling potatoes, strewing sweet pea seeds on the ground. I ascended the hill with the root of a white rose, believing in the Nippon idea that blossoms for the dead should be white, and set it by the grave. Then I stole into the canyon. I amassed the dead leaves of redwood by the brook for a campfire. The smoke rose like a soul unto heaven. I watched its beautiful confusion. When I left, a snake obstructed my path, flashing its needle of a tongue. Snake, one of my greatest foes, the others being cheese and mathematics. I turned pale, but I bravely faced it, hoping that it would speak a word or two, as one did to Eve. I placed my eyes on it, though in fear. Perhaps it wasn't as intelligent as the one in the Garden of Eden. Maybe it thought it nothing but a waste of time to address a Jap poorly stored in English. It crept away. I ran down the hill. A storm of laughter struck me from within when I came to my willow cottage. I examined it from the window. Half a dozen young ladies were biting pie, rustic pastry I ever so hate. Picnic, I murmured. My blood gushed up. I was on the verge of denouncing their eruption. The cottage belongs to anyone, I said in my afterthought, as it does to me. I slipped away. I found myself in the plum orchard with a hoe. I began to root the weeds. I waited silently for their departure. 25th, the spring hills were coquetting like a tea-house maiden, singing the air is lovely, like wine. Come, Lord, come, Lord. The curtain for the spring comedy has not yet risen. Already the picnic band invades. Today I will make myself mistress of a hillside coffee-house. The poet, the eternally sweet poet, hastened to borrow a tent from a neighbor. He set it on the greenest spot of grass before my cottage. I must excuse his conceit, he entreated, in showing his skill by baking a cake for me. Accept my 100 arigatos. I bowed demonstratively. I pasted a paper, such a bashful brown piece, from a butcher's table with the sign of Bishop's Rest. The poet tacked 10 cents for coffee and cake on the fence by the tent. The cups, what a shame that their arms were all off, were rinsed, when he showed me an imperial pound cake, declaring it his own manufacture. At 3 o'clock I was fully prepared for an honorable guest. The coffee on the oil stove was surging when 2 parties went by, not spending even one look at my sign. Times are awfully hard, I think. People have not luxury enough to spare even a dime, I murmured sadly. I said that I would have no business if I didn't make the next party my victim. I appeared before the tent, with a few girls who were born for laughing but not for thinking, came close by. Will you rest and taste the cake that the poet made, ladies? I said. That's nice, they said, rolling into the tent. I served them with coffee and cake. Is this surely the poet's cake? It looks like baker's cake, one girl said. Mr. Poet assured me it was of his own making, I replied in cool reserve. After they left, I scrutinized the cake. Oh, yeah, a little bakery mark was seen. Mighty liar, I grumbled. Abrupt clouds clouded the sun. The winds scolded bitterly. I decided there was no business remaining. I called Mr. Heine and Uncle into the Bishop's Rest. Your cake was fine, Mr. Poet. I know it, Miss Morning Glory. I'm a pretty good cook, you see. I cooked once in a Sierra camp for 50 miners. I was paid $20 a week. Alas, it was the biggest money I ever earned. By the way, Mr. Heine, the bakery sent a bill for you. I placed before him a slip that I had prepared for the purpose. Ha, 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 ha. His open laughter was as from a simple fawn. I noticed afterward a black mass heaped in a ditch. The whole situation grew plain to me. He couldn't bake, but only burn in the oven, and had dispatched his neighbor for the cake. Dear poet. 26th, we pressed the poet to receive some money as just a sign of our gratitude. Mr. Heine despised our thought. Honorable gentleman, I found a tin box. I put the money in. Ask me not how much. I dug a hole by the willow tree beside the lily pond and buried the money box. I tumbled a stone over it to mark it. I'll write him about it from New York. See, Uncle, isn't it unique? I said. Uncle wasn't enthusiastic in approving my idea. He couldn't check me, however, as the money was mine. He said he would order an elegant vase from Tokyo. 27th, I intended to keep a sweet fashion of old Japan in presenting a poem at my sayonara. We will take leave tomorrow. O gracious, grateful poet abode. My farewell poem in 17-syllable form is as follows. Sayonara no Uraya no Kori, Mizu no Neni. Remain, oh remain, my grief of sayonara, there in water sound. 28th, Mrs. Heine kissed me. Dear old grandma, do you know what this is, Miss Morning Glory? The poet said, plucking a leaf from a tree by his door. Fig leaf, isn't it? My sayonara poem in Japanese autograph. Yes, my child, it is a fig leaf. Do you know the fig tree? It is the shyest tree in the world. Classical tree, indeed. It has no blossom, being so modest of display, but it has the fruits. Remember, my young lady, its teaching of modesty, modesty. Sayonara, Mr. Poet. 1 minute, Uncle, I said. I ran into the willow cottage to get a cupful of water. I watered my friend, Miss Poppy, with love. Bye-bye, little girl.
Read by Kristen Hand. The American Diary of a Japanese Girl by Yone Noguchi. In America, Part 15. San Francisco, March 1st. Civilization again. The first thing was to buy a cake of the best soap, because my hands had perfected their transformation into worthless leather while I dwelt on the hill. What kind of soap did I use, do you suppose? Laundry soap. Second, delightful Ada. We drove to the Cliff House. Ada to laugh at the stupid song of the seals, I to say my adieu. Goodbye, Pacific Ocean. We cried in hugging. We shall not see each other for some time, maybe never again. Ada. Oh, Ada-san. Third, this afternoon. Eastward ho, ho. Overland Train, March 4th. Madam Butterfly lay by me, appealing to be read. No, Aya, I'll never open. I erred in buying you, I said. I dislike that, madame. It sounds indecent ever since the gentleman Loti spilled it with his Madame Chrysanthemum. The honorable author of Madame Butterfly is Mr. Wrong. Do you know that Japanese have no boundary between L and R? Undoubtedly, he is qualified to be a wrong. Authorship is nothing at all nowadays, since authors are thick as Chinese laundries. Well, still, it can be honorable if it is honorable. Japanese fiction penned by the Tojin. It is a completely sad affair. I wonder why the author, God bless him, didn't fit himself for brooming the streets instead of scrawling. The characters in his book, I am grateful I see no lady writer of Japanese novels yet, remind me of the devils of mixture swarming in Yokohama or Kobe, whose Jap mother was a professional hell. It is lamentable to set the verdict on them that they have inherited the art of framing lies from their mamma. Do I vex you, gentlemen, when I say that your Japanese type could only be an unprincipled half-caste? Your Nippon character eyed in blue and hairy-skinned always. Isn't it absurd when it puts American shoe on one foot and a wooden clog on the other? And if you insist on registering it as a Jap, I shall merely laugh loudly. One heroine I have read of placed a light summer haori over her heavily padded midwinter clothes. Your Oriental novel, let me be courageous enough to say, is a farce at best. Oh, just wait, my sweet Americans. A genuine one will soon be offered to you by Morning Glory. I stepped out to the platform and threw out Madam Butterfly. Poor Madam. I trust in the mountain lions of high Nevada to cherish her lovingly. 5th. Matsuba-sama, the following letter creeps under your honorable table. How is yourself? I imagine that the breeze fills your bower with the odor of yumi flowers. I am definite in saying that the Japanese yumi is of different origin from the California plum tree, which has no expression in divine fragrance, as I am told. I see your indolent face in the air, awaiting poetical inspiration on your bamboo piazza, where the umi petals are beautifully blotched. There are several months yet till we shall quarrel face to face over the superiority of English or Oriental literature. Miss Pineleaf, I, or rather we, have said farewell to Frisco. It was sad that I never saw any battleship, except one shame-faced gunboat, in the Bay of the Golden Gate. A bay without battleship is like a door without a lock. Can you fancy any Japanese city without soldiers? American soldier? I am sorry to say that I have met no soldier in my 4 months at the Pacific. I presume that the practical American gins can't bear to see such a useless ornamentation. Yes, soldiers are degenerating, in my opinion, to the rank of a fireplace on a hot summer day. How stimulating, however, was the sound of the fearless hoofs of a cavalier. When the sabers of a regiment flashed in the sunlight, I could never keep from fluttering my paper handkerchief. I shall not excite myself in such a joy in America. I made the acquaintance of one colonel at Mrs. Willis's. He is a jolly businessman. Just think of a colonel plus merchant. Is it possible? He changes his white shirt every morning and shines his shoes twice a day. I should say that he will carry a sheet and opera hat and leave his gun behind whenever he is summoned to a battlefield. Possibly he has hidden his colonelship in his trunk. I found afterward that every old gentleman is a colonel or judge. Everything in California is made for just a woman. California gentleman isn't privileged to raise one question against a lady. He is provided with all sorts of exclamations to please the woman. If he should ever miss one dinner with his wife, he would be divorced in court on the morrow. Uncle says that the Eastern gents are not so devoted to the lady. If it be true, am I now entering the city of man? How sad. Have you any experience of writing by the car window? I feel a strange delight in scanning my romantically tremulous handwriting. A certain famous Jap penman Takes wine before he begins, for the sake of putting his mind in a fine frenzy, as you know. The shaking of the car produces in me the same effect. Isn't this letter great enough to be honored on your tokonoma? Can you ever imagine how vast America is? Yesterday our car ran all day long, over the mountains and prairies, seeing only a few huts. Oh, such a snowstorm in the evening! The train rushed like a maddened dragon. It was verily an astonishingly ghastly spectacle as any human thought could ever picture. I thrilled with a feeling of tragic ecstasy, which is the highest emotion. Can you recollect that you and I once stood under the darkest rains without an umbrella and laughed hysterically? I love shocking emotion. Since I was touched by the continental air, I measure my lungs dilating 2 inches bigger. How sorry I shall be for you when I return. You are so tiny. I expect myself to be 5 inches higher within the next few months. America is the country where everything grows, don't you know? Even the stars look a deal larger than in Japan. Looking back at the Rocky Mountains, yours, Asagayo. 6th. The rocking of the train makes us babies in the cradle. The car is a modern opium resort where we sleep and sleep. I shouldn't wonder if we all turned into nodding Rip Van Winkles. Today I had a sleeping contest with Uncle. I was defeated. Chicago, 7th. Chicago water is a perfect horror. Gomenyo. That's no way to begin, is it? I never waver in saying that California girls borrow their fairness from their water. There is no question in my mind why the Chicago women, certain hundreds I saw, if you please, are barren in their complexion. Oh, uncle, how many days have we to tarry here? I asked, within an hour after we had set foot in this city. I grieve over my contact with such a city. It is no place for a lady. Is here any lady? It is just the place for a man. No show marked only for a man is respectable, I dare say. Are Chicago men gentlemen? They are not sensitive about their hats in the hotel elevator. The laundry work isn't superb, I judge, as not everyone's shirt is snowy as a San Franciscan's. I cannot blame their black fingernails as they live in smoke. Even the Frisco smoke hindered my breath at my opening moment in America. I should have died if it had been Chicago. Bodily cleanliness is the first chapter in the whitening of the soul. How many mortals are there here with a clear soul? Chicago is Mr. Nobody without the smoke, like Japan without a fan. The prosperity of a modern city is measured by the bulk of its smoke, Morning Glory. But I don't approve of their using a cheap coal. Health has to be guarded, my uncle said. A driver carried us from the station as if we were pigs. Mind you, this is Chicago, illustrious for its hams. I barred my ears with my hands in the carriage. The thunderous noise menaced me so. Do roses blossom well in the turbulent air? I have no doubt that Chicago has no poet. Cook County fosters 3,000 poets, one paper says, my young woman, Uncle said in laughter. Don't say so. As soon as I had established myself in the hotel, I inscribed, with the longest apologetical ogigi to Mr. Shelley, as follows: Hell is a city much like Chicago, a populous and a smoky city. 8th. How sad I felt not to be greeted by even one star from my hotel window last night. I was disgusted with the poor taste of the coffee. Such a first-class hotel. Coffee and Maxim, I have said, should be of the very best. Commonplace words with the golden heading of Maxim would be as cheap as a negress with white powder. I would choose even a bread pudding rather than a suspicious cup of coffee. Uncle failed to secure a box of cigarettes. The most delicate shape for smoking is the slender stalk of a cigarette. The cigar ever so much impresses me as barbarous. Chicagoans might say it was the only manly smoke. Truly. Chicago is the city of man, whatever that means. I'm glad that the young gentlemen, with genteel canes under their arms, don't open any cigar stand conference here. Such an abomination in Frisco. No drones whatever. My uncle was going out sightseeing with me in a silk hat. I objected to it. Plug hat doesn't suit informal Chicago. He changed his frock coat for a sack coat. Now, uncle, you look more like a Chicago gentleman, I said. Yes, this is a plain sack coat city. He was fussing with a handkerchief. I said, laughing, "Never mind, uncle. I am sure the men don't carry it here, since the women never carry a purse in their hand." Isn't it awful that one, even a stranger, ought to know everything in Chicago? A slight question to the street people would be condemned as a nuisance. Even the policeman shows no chivalry. I was sorry that the color of his suit was bitterly faded. Isn't Chicago rich enough to furnish a new one? I suppose many dogs must be hanging around here because the policeman arms himself with a piece of wood for chasing them off. I should like to know if there is any blacker house than the City Hall. It will be a matter of a short time before the Chicago River turns to ink. Then we went to observe the Lake of Michigan from Lincoln Park. I scoffed at my absurdity in being ready with the first line for my poem on the lake. If you knew that "O Minstrel of Heaven and Truth" was the beginning, you would laugh surely. The lake wasn't a huge singer like the Pacific Ocean at all. "Uncle, please count how many stories in that building," I begged. Chicago structures crush my little liver completely. Did I ever dream that I would eye such pillars of the sky in my life? When I returned to my hotel, I declared that I would not open my trunk because my everyday dress was good enough for Chicago. I regret to say that the gentlemen are so homely. Ninth, how dear is the green, crispy paper money. What a historical look. It made me feel as if I were at home. I hated ever so much the gold coin in California. Its threateningly mercantile aspect made me shudder as at a speculator of Kakigara-cho of Tokyo. If I like Chicago, it must be on account of its soiled paper money. I will exchange all my gold to it. I went to one store for a short skirt like that Chicago woman wears. It may be a change, though shortness in hair and dress is my aversion. It may be advantageous in showing one's shoes, though eternal exhibition isn't tasty. It would be an accurate account of my reason for buying to say that I singularly wished to use up a few jumbles of money. I dulled myself reading the advertising bills through my hotel window. There's no block free from them. Vertisement. Isn't it horrid? I laughed, wondering why those enterprising American gins don't employ the extensive backs of prize fighters in the ring. Uncle and I went to see the Injuns dance. How fantastically they sang. There was a Japanese tea house. It is no tea house at all. It was the saddest thing I ever saw. I thought the Chicagoans were not fastidious with anything. Any old thing will do, they might say jollily. Open, hard-working Chicago. Has she much education? Read by Kristen Hand. The American Diary of a Japanese Girl by Yone Noguchi. In America, Part 16. 10th. My uncle wanted me to join him in visiting a stockyard to see the doomed pigs groaning "foo, foo, foo." I declined. Uncle started off alone. There was some time before I heard someone fisting on my door. "A Japanese gentleman wishes to see your husband, madam," a hotel attendant addressed me. Good God, my husband? I cried. Satemo. How could any porter be such an ignoramus as not to distinguish between Mrs. and Miss? Possibly he esteemed me modern enough to marry an old man for money's sake. Oya, he was Mr. Consul of Chicago. Walk in, sir. Uchino Hito will return within an hour or so. Then I explained about my husband. We both laughed. There is nothing more pleasing when in an alien country than a chit-chat in our native bicha-bicha, Japanese speech. Such a beautifully indefinite, poetically untidy language. I love it. 11th. It would be too much of a risk of one's life to stay in Chicago. Goodbye. Flowerless, birdless city, sayonara. Buffalo, 12th. Niagara Falls was a disappointment. Uncle says I have still to learn how to be appreciative of things. A red brick chimney by the falls spoils the whole affair, I do think. My uncle was cross, saying that he had eaten the toughest beef of his life. He seized 2 Canadian dimes and a bogus $50 in an hour. Poor uncle, isn't this Buffalo town awful? I said. New York, 13th. Miss Morning Glory has stepped into Greater New York at last. 13th of March, 1900. Today will be the special day of my family history. My entrance was delightful to the full. The train stole gracefully into the city at early morn. The sky was distinct, like the lake of Biwa. The respectable face of the city accepted us charmingly. I bounced my little body in my happy thought of another chapter of life. I felt like Dante, crawled out of darkest hell after the torture of the terrible show. Oh, Chicago. Our kind Japanese consul of New York was looking after our arrival with a carriage. I saw a horse car trotting. It encouraged me to think that even an ignorant Jap girl might find her own living here, since such an old-fashioned thing exists perfectly. I secretly fixed in my mind that I will adventure my independent life when the crisis demands. Our carriage rolled up Fifth Avenue to Central Park. How often had I imagined laying me in this celebrated ground? "Pray let me off to smell the smell of the New York breeze," I exclaimed. When I was stationed on the third floor of an edifice on Riverside Drive (what a brisk name in the world), which was Mr. Consul's home, my bubbling fancies hastened down with the waters of the Hudson River under my window. Hudson River? It is my dear old acquaintance, introduced by the ever so pleasing Mr. Irving. See its classical profundity before my face. Where's Sleepy Hollow, I wonder? The spectacle of the river reminded me of the Sumida Gawa of Tokyo, mirroring the clouds of affectionate cherry blossoms which border its bank. It would be a remarkable idea, I thought, to petition the mayor of New York for the Japanese cherry trees to parade on this side of the Hudson. When they are in flower, I will open a tea house under them, of course. My attire as a mistress should be a little red crepe apron to begin with. My head will be wound with a Japanese towel to endow my oriental eyes with certain better results. I will raise my voice, calling, "Honorable rest! Honorable tea plucked by the choicest musumes." What a novel! Romance. How I can live without it. In that case I must entreat the removal of the characters on the other side, which are "Lots for sale," because I don't see any such unaristocratic sign by the Sumida Gawa. 14th. Oh, snow! Yukaya Furay Furay. The season of the city is still within the fence of winter. I was grateful to my fate that conveyed me here to overtake my loving snow. I settled me by my window in absorption with the snow view of Hudson Gawa. How busily the snowflakes fall. Their cautiously silent hurry made me recollect the drama of the China-Japan War. How stealthily the soldiers marched at midnight. Can I ever forget how I tugged my shoji, crying, "Victory, die Nippon!" I raised the window, stretching out my arm. I collected the snow petals in the hollow of my palm. I tasted them. "Uncle, New York snow is as deliciously savored as at home," I said. Central Park must have been artistically attired. "Oji-san, let us go to the park for snow viewing. I advise you to till a bit more poetry in yourself, uncle," I announced. I began to change my dress before his decision. 15th. We went to the famous Brooklyn Bridge. Verily, New York gentlemen are interested with their papers in the car. Newspapers, oh newspapers. There's no slip of a doubt that they would die without the sight of their newspapers. The unheroic part about them is that they forget neatly to offer their seats to a lady. Woman loves an absent-minded man once in a while, but never on the car, I do say. I suppose every woman of this city has to be rich. Must I equip a carriage? I do not see why I could not win the first prize with my Louisiana ticket. How I wish to fabric an every inch a Japanese mansion on Fifth Avenue, and welcome 1,000 Tojins to hear my Jap song on Sunday. Is this bridge built for Americans or Europeans, uncle? People crossing here use no English, I said. Liberty statue. I will let the beauty statue hail from the Bay of Yedo when I am wealthy enough to afford it. Doesn't Nippon signify beauty? How dear is that sign, "Beware of pickpockets." It makes me just feel as if I were at Shinbashi Station in Tokyo, doesn't it you, uncle? Humbly humble Rikisha men. If I were besieged by them imploring me to take a little honorable ride, the scene would be complete. I miss such a merry car in America. We walked down Broadway. We came to a graveyard. Tombstones in the midst of commerce. Oh, romantic New York! I wondered how Wall Street gentlemen would be struck glancing at them. What a soft silence hovered. The old Gothic church was my own ideal. "Uncle, let us fall in and rest," I cried. The morning service was proceeding. Alas and alas, not one soul was there. Is this a religious city? The inside was compact of heavenly purple air. Mr. Bishop, whatever he may be, gestured like another being from a loftier realm. A beautiful boy, there's no greater fascination than a boy with a prayer book, supported the service. Intangibleness of speech is itself a divine charm. "Will you mind asking Mr. Bishop whether he wants a sweeping girl? I wish I were given just a chance to clean such a holy church, Uncle." Then I looked up to Mr. Secretary. 16th. It seems to me a recent style that New York ladies discard their babies to leave them in the hands of European immigrants. Very likely they want them to learn an ungrammatical hodgepodge, as respectableness is old-fashioned, and accompany a dog with mighty affection. Oh, my dear Chin that I left at home. Shall I call it to America? Little loyal thing, pathetic, clinging. I am sure it would beat any other in a dog contest. 17th. I never saw such hungry eyes in my life as those of an organ grinder, set upon the windows for a dropping penny. To an artist they would hint of a prisoner's bloodshot eyes, numbed by useless gazing toward the light of the world. Poor Italians! They don't know one thing but turning the handle. The last 2 days they placed their organ, read their sign, Garibaldi and Company, under my apartment at the same hour for my bit money. I thought one of them might be a grandson of the renowned Italian patriot. How interesting it would be to be told of his shipwreck in life. Now 3 o'clock. There's 1 more hour before their frolic music will gush. I must wrap some money in paper for them. God bless them, simple creatures who work hard. 18th. Mr. Consul, an old man who sips the greyness of celibacy, never strays out from his official duty. He calls society and novels 2 recent pieces of foolery. The family of Uncle's intimate is off in Europe. The possibility of a nice time for me is very illegible. Sumarani. Last night I sketched an adventure of enlisting in the band of domestics. "Capital idea to examine a New York household," I said when I left my breakfast table. I humbled myself to a newspaper office with the following shamefaced advertisement. "Jap girl, 19, good-looking, longs for a place in a family of the first rank." I used every kind of oratory to bring my uncle to agree to my 2 weeks of freedom. 19th. 2 letters were waiting for me at the office. One from number 296 of a certain part. 296? Unfortunately, it sounds like Nikumu in Japanese, meaning hatred. And the other was from Fifth Avenue. Parlor maid. $12 for a month. I shall accept it, since it is the proper quarter for seeing the high-toned New Yorker. I feel already a servant feeling. I am sorry that I didn't discipline myself before in dusting. I will style me an honest worker for a while. Toiling for my daily bread does ring an American sound, doesn't it? Domestic girl has no right, I think, to sit with Messrs. Consul and Secretary, I said, moving my dinner plate to the kitchen table. Morning glory, isn't it time you changed the book of your diary? Really, sir? Let me close now with a ceremonious bow. My next book shall be entitled The Diary of a Parlor Maid.